I'm Martijn Verburg. Some of you may know me as the Diabolical Developer. Was anyone here at my session last year? A few of you. So perhaps you'll know what to expect. So there were a number of complaints last year that I told a bunch of nefarious lies. And I was told this year to bring along someone else who would actually tell some truths. So I've brought with me my colleague Ben Evans.
Good morning. It's good to see so many of you here. It's kind of cruel and unusual punishment that we're all here at 8:30 and there wasn't even any coffee outside. I mean, how do they expect us to function? So I hope I will be able to do something to counteract the dastardly and diabolical influence of my colleague here over the next hour. Fortunately, we know that it's the time of the day when brains are not working ever so quickly, so we won't expect too much code and too much hard thinking out of you. Yeah. Maybe.
We promise there's no closure in here. Is anyone code closure? You know Lisp? Yes? There's always one in the front. Fantastic. So this is a closure talk for those of you who didn't realize. That's right, lock the doors please. They're all stuck now. So what are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk today about the ongoing anti-development patterns that are anti-patterns in software development. So last year I spoke, had a bit of a light-hearted talk, shall we say, about some of the evil things that you developers love to do to your colleagues in order to stay in your jobs. And we just thought we'd continue the theme this year, but perhaps actually give a little bit more serious advice this time on how you can get around your evil colleagues, because, you know, it takes one to know one. So, we have your own private house. So, shall we ask them to give us some?
So basically over the course of the talk, you know, we're going to cover a whole bunch of different anti-patterns, but we thought we'd start off by making you think just a little bit. So who wants to shout out some of the anti-patterns that they see in the code? And we'll see if we get to them all. Yeah, over here. Oh, an empty seat. Okay, that's fine. That doesn't actually count as an anti-pattern, but it's still a good start.
No, it is. The empty, I'm noting this down, empty seat anti-pattern.
Yep.
Right, good.
What could that one be? It's just like a remote worker that does no work?
Yes, empty seat anti-pattern. It's remote worker does no work. Good.
Who else has got an anti-pattern?
What have your colleagues done to you last week that you just gnashed your teeth and went, oh, that's horrible? Oh,
okay.
yes.
Ooh. Okay.
There's nothing wrong with those statements. They're really easy to follow. I don't know what you're talking about. Love them. Strategy, pattern, to if statements.
Yep.
So I think I've actually got a utility that does that.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Any others? I think there was somebody here. Yep, go for it. Empty test block.
Oh, empty catch block.
Empty catch block, okay.
Yes, that's one of my... We were actually discussing this yesterday with a bunch of people.
Hands up if you came to the Deadlocks talk yesterday, that Deadlocks lab.
Yeah,
we're
talking about it in the Deadlocks lab.
So you know exactly what we're talking about here.
Exactly.
Yeah,
empty catch block.
Perfect.
It's a great way to deadlock your entire machine by having empty catch blocks. Good stuff.
Visitor pattern to big switch.
Visitor to big switch. Brilliant.
Classes with 1,500 constants.
What's the problem with that?
I can't think of like a big open source project that would do that. Can you, Martijn?
No, not one at all that I might happen to be involved in. 1,500 constants. Okay, well, I think that's a pretty good start. So we'll try and cover those off towards the end of the talk.
I think at least a couple of those are actually kind of present in the material.
Quite
so
brilliant.
Go. So should we do our first anti-pattern?
We'll go for our first anti-pattern. The first anti-pattern, and you've seen it all this week.
Conference-driven delivery.
Yep. Who here has done a talk at a conference or a lightning talk at their local user group? Yeah? You wrote it literally 10 minutes before you had to go speak. It's the only way forward.
So, anybody who was thinking that they might suggest that this talk was an example of this anti-pattern, that would be nice and meta, wouldn't it? Well, we have someone that you should be talking to. This guy.
He's our trained killer otter. Notice the sharp teeth. Yep. And he is running around this room somewhere, so you just keep an eye out under your chairs.
If you hear a high-pitched yipping noise, it's either someone that's had too much coffee or it's this guy.
So I like to say the real professionals, and you would have heard some of them talking last night at some of the parties. I personally like the pressure of having to deliver 10 minutes before I have to speak. And I think that people tend to work best under pressure. So I always argue, especially if you're doing a keynote at JavaOne, or perhaps you're Larry Ellison doing the Oracle Open World keynote, get those slides started probably about 25 minutes before you've got to do your talk.
30 if you're hungover.
Yeah, 30 if you're hungover. That's certainly the way to go. Do people think I'm right?
Hands up if you think we're right about this is the way to write talks.
Yeah,
Excellent.
excellent.
Glad to see the gospel is spreading.
Few disciples.
In all seriousness, who knows what this stands for? The six Ps?
6 Ps. No ex-military people here? No?
Yeah, I have to go to the bathroom.
You go to the bathroom. Okay, it stands for proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. Right? And it's an old adage that the people in the military have used for quite some time, and it is certainly true when it comes to preparing your presentations, not just for conference speaking, but for presentations you've got to give your colleagues, presentations you've got to give to your bosses, because you have to remember that communicating is really, really important. Probably actually more important than the code you write, interestingly enough.
Yeah, it's one of those strange things that the more you give a talk and the more you get comfortable with speaking in front of groups of people, the easier it gets. So it's always good to do at least a couple of run-throughs of the talk. Just dry runs. If you're going to be giving a talk at a conference, then make sure you maybe set up a user group meeting. Hands up if you're a member of a Java user group anywhere in the world.
A little bit better.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So for people that aren't, I'd really like to know why, because one of the things we're trying to do is to boost attendance and to get the word out about user groups. So if you want to come and talk to me afterwards and tell me what the barriers are which stop you from attending, because they're great ways to practice your speaking skills, get new contacts, to network. So whatever it is that's holding you back from joining, I'd really like to hear it. So come and talk to me.
Yeah. And when we talk about test-driven presentations, you can literally test drive it yourself. Record yourself in a Google Hangout, record yourself in a Skype conversation, and just listen back to yourself how you're giving a presentation. So if you're shy initially of even talking in front of a few people, start with that, then start with a group of a few of your friends, or maybe bore your partner or your wife or your husband to death with your technical talk, and go on from there.
And it's amazing what you can find out just by watching yourself speak. The pacing, the particular mannerisms of speech. It can be horrendous the first time you do it because you just go, oh God, do I really sound like that? But you get over it remarkably quickly, and it's one of the best ways to improve your own speaking confidence.
All right, so that was a bit of a meta one, but on to number 2.
Oh, well, no, we got a vote on this, didn't we?
Yeah, we got a vote on this. Okay. Yeah. Number 2. This is my favorite, really. Mortgage-driven development.
Hands up if you think you know what mortgage-driven development means.
A few people,
yeah.
Few people,
okay.
Who here practices it? Fantastic. All right. Well, obviously, we have got tough economic times, folks. We're in a recession around the world. Everyone's worried about keeping their jobs. So what you have to make sure is that knowledge is power. Okay? Do not share anything you know about your system or your software with any of your colleagues, right? Because when it comes time to fix a problem in production, you're the only person who knows how to fix it, which means you're an invaluable cog in the machine and you can't be fired.
Don't tell me that you'd actually, advocate, restricting access to source control.
Oh, absolutely, yes. If you can get into the team, the IT architects team that controls source control and make sure that all patches have to go through you first, more power to you. That's fantastic.
What about documentation?
No documentation is allowed anywhere. If you must have documentation, if someone insists on seeing it, put it on a USB stick afterwards, take it home with you, lock it in a lockbox.
Seriously, the best way to secure your career in these times is to make sure that you communicate properly with your peers, with your stakeholders, with your business. And documentation is a very important part of that. Up until recently, one of the largest DNS providers was still running a DNS daemon that had a comment in the source code which said, if you don't understand what happens next, you shouldn't be looking at my code. I think there was a hand up over here. Yeah, hi.
Absolutely. Source control on your USB stick, because you should really have folders called A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If you need to have more than 26 revisions, just go A1. You get the idea, right?
Yeah. So you could be a cave troll, but as we go through our development careers, we find that more and more it's about the social interactions. It's crazy how much software development is not about the technical aspects of the craft, but is about the communication aspects. It just seems to get more and more so each year. And that means that the developers who communicate best are the ones that are going to have the most success.
Who here has a GitHub account?
Okay.
Yeah? Point proven. Right?
Hands up if you know what GitHub is, because I actually had a few people the other day who didn't.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So.
GitHub, social coding. It says it on the tin, right? Perfect.
Oh,
right.
So hands up who thinks that mortgage-driven development is an anti-pattern now, and who thinks it's a pattern?
I think it's a pattern.
Okay, cool.
Next one, distracted by shiny. Now, we're all technical people here, and I don't know if you saw in the technical keynote the Raspberry Pi and that cool little encasing it had, and the first thing I wanted to do was get the hell out of that keynote and go down and play with one, right? So I think that's also very important in your day job. You're not there to work for your boss, you're not there to work for your customers, you're there to work for yourself and keep yourself excited. So pick up that latest framework, try out a bit of Scala, try out a bit of Clojure, use that latest bit of HTML5, you know, wipe off that stupid Windows installation they gave you and put, you know, a decent Linux distribution on there, preferably something obscure, and, you know, keep yourself happy. You might even get yourself on Hacker News, which is what we all want to do, right? So always use the latest tech, always upgrade to the very latest point release versions of everything. Don't worry about the fact that, you know, Apple's iOS Maps sucks. You know, you're on the latest and greatest, so you're ahead of the curve. Winning. Too soon. We have an Apple fanboy in the room. Get out.
Okay, so how do we counteract the nefarious effects of distracted by shiny? Well, you prototype and evaluate. There is a place for new technology. Innovation is one of the lifebloods of our industry and of our careers. But at the same time, there's also the question of consistency. You know, you shouldn't whack something in to your architecture just because you feel like it. There should be sound reasons for everything. You know, the number of architectures that I've seen which are littered with things which the developers clearly put in because they thought they were a good idea. Yeah, and then you go back through the changelog, and then you realise that it was just that half of it was added on a Friday afternoon when people were bored.
Do people here have to evaluate web frameworks fairly often? I find this is quite a common one. So if you do have to evaluate web frameworks, or you're trying to pick up the next web framework, or even just any next technology you want to pick up, go take a look at Matt Rabel's comparison spreadsheet and presentation on SlideShare. Okay? He shows you how to go through in the space of about half a day or a day and evaluate things on 20 criteria, okay? And you pick and prototype from there and then actually implement, okay? It's Matt Rabel, so M-A-T-T is his first name, Rabel last name, R-A-I-B-L-E.
Yeah.
Apologies for the lack of the URL, but I can give it to anyone afterwards.
And there's also there's a great blog post which if people haven't read, then they definitely should, called "Why Do Good Technologists Make Bad Technology Choices?" And it lists the 5 main reasons why decent developers and decent technical people can end up making, you know, a decision which is bad for their business. You know, it's reasons like boredom, desire to have, you know, new shiny things on the CV. Frustration with existing process, lack of understanding. It's like 2 pages long, and it's one of the best insights into the decision making and the cognitive biases that technologists have.
Yeah, we had the question in one of the BOF sessions yesterday, actually, or the day before, I think, where someone was going, "I want to be able to combine Spring, dependency injection, and CDI just for fun, and I want to put it into my production servers." And we're like, "No, why? Why are you doing this?" Because it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, at the end of the day, as technologists, we're here to solve actual business problems and provide value. Hands up if you work in a financial or another large corporate environment. Okay? Quite a few people. So, does anybody know how long a new piece of technology, on average, will stay in your architecture once it gets in? Anyone take a guess? These guys, 15 years?
25 years.
25 years, okay. So these are long periods of time. And if you work out what the support cost is for every line of code and every new technology which you get into your architecture and which you can't get out again, you know, that's a huge cost to your businesses and the people you work for now and for a very long time into the future. We often talk about the pyramid Is people familiar with Olabini's pyramid? No? Okay. So the way this works is, not every piece of code, not every part of technology which goes into a business system is created equal. If you imagine a pyramid with essentially 3 layers in it, and towards the bottom of the pyramid are the things which are the longest lived. You know, if you're a financial institution, this is a risk or a pricing engine, you know, or some part of the internal infrastructure of the bank. This stuff does not change very often. Here is where the code, which is going to stay there for 7 or 15 or 25 years, that's where it lives. Higher up, you see places where more agile and more flexible technologies can fit in, because that layer of the pyramid is stuff where stuff's changing on, you know, maybe 6 months, maybe 3 months. You know, it's web pages for intranet and customer-facing sites. And then at the very top level, you have stuff which is potentially changing every day or every few days. So figuring out which component you're writing, where it fits into that overall pyramid, and how long its lifespan is essential when making technology choices.
And I'll just add my personal favorite from the Java enterprise space. Remember when everyone thought that SOA and SOAP was a really good idea? Yeah.
How many people still have to deal with SOAP? How many people like still dealing with SOAP?
Yeah. Oh, there's always one
there's a couple of people at the back.
As I said before to the Apple fanboy, get out. All right, we're going to go on to number 4. Another one of my favorites, design-driven design. Who has read the Gang of 4 Patterns design book? The people who were talking about the strategy pattern and the visitor pattern, we know who you are. How many of the patterns have you fit in your code? Lots and lots and lots of them, right? And if you use UML Code Generators, like the Rational Unified Modeling Suite from IBM back in the day, fantastic tool, you literally type in strategy, MVC, session facade, pattern JPA thing, comes up in a UML diagram, and you go, generate code. Fantastic.
And you see, personally, I never learnt UML properly. I mean, all right, I played a bit with sequence diagrams and class diagrams, but I never got into the whole UML thing. That's because I always secretly suspected they'd be teaching it in hell, and now I have proof.
So, yeah, quite seriously, if you want to impress your colleagues and impress your bosses and be able to talk about best practices, you should be using design patterns left, right, and center, right? MVC, session facades, data access objects, or SOA, all this great, great stuff, right? And, you know, the more jargon you have as well, especially when you're walking past a manager, you just spit out some jargon about the best practice design patterns you're using. Ties back into that mortgage-driven development we were talking about earlier. Good, good stuff. Cha-ching. Exactly, cha-ching. Fantastic.
Okay, so true story. So I was working for a financial institution who I will spare the blushes of, and I was interviewing a guy that had come to us from an exchange which had recently had a major technology change, and this guy found himself with the wrong skill set. So he'd come to me for a job. And I said, you know, he seemed to, you know, sort of vaguely know what he was talking about. So I said, could you sort of describe to me what your job is? And he said, well, you see, what I essentially do is I take patterns from the insert name of management consultancy here, approved book of enterprise architecture patterns, and apply them. And I was just dumbstruck. I couldn't believe that someone would actually say that it was their job to root through some approved book of patterns and just apply them to solve problems. I'm not quite sure how I made it through the remaining 15 minutes of that interview before I could politely ask the guy to leave, but I was crawling the walls pretty much straight away after that.
That management consultancy, by the way, is one of the largest in the world and an incredibly successful business, so I argue personally that he is dead wrong, and they've got it absolutely right. Design patterns are definitely the way to go.
So everybody here, I hope, has done at least a little bit of agile development. So yeah, everyone's nodding. Good. So the idea that design is a separate activity is something which, of course, belongs to waterfall. With agile methods, you do, and I'm not, a huge believer in the Church of Agile and, the white robes, and it's kind of a bit like a cult. But there are some good ideas in there, and one of the ideas is that the design represents a huge cost to the overall development process. So anything which you can defer and not do right now, that's a good thing. And so that leads us to the principle of just design what you need right now.
And we'll add to this as well that you actually want to promote and incentivize less code, less patterns, less frameworks, less boilerplate, right? So there's a famous saying that we quote and we've been using in our careers is that You should pay your junior developers for the lines of code they write and the things they add. And you should pay your senior developers for what they take away. Right? And this has actually worked really well for both Ben and I in our various careers and the teams we've led, is that as over time you encourage people to take code away and you encourage change sets that have a negative diff, the code base gets simpler, the code base reflects the actual business use cases you're trying to solve as opposed to just all of this framework plumbing code. Okay? So go back and think about applying those sorts of techniques in your day-to-day coding next week.
Yeah, another true story from the trenches. I was on a project to decommission a very large system, and the manager who was responsible for it managed to get 98% of the way there, and they were very, very pleased, and they managed to argue themselves to a very, very nice bonus that year, after which point they immediately left. And the reason why they immediately left became apparent the following quarter, because the stuff was running on a huge mainframe, and although they managed to produce 98% of the system and get rid of it, the 2% that was remaining still required a mainframe. So in fact, that 98% of getting rid of the code equated to 0% reduction in cost, because you still need an entire mainframe to run the 2% of the job that was left. So by not being as aggressive as they could be and actually making sure that you get all the last bits of a system out and refactoring where necessary, you sometimes end up carrying around a huge system burden which you don't need. So being very strongly incentivized to get rid of source code and to get rid of whole subsystems where they're no longer needed is a very important thing. Yeah. To your point, this is kind of why we end up with 25-year lifespans of code in systems. It's because people don't get aggressive about ripping stuff out.
So have anyone heard of an open source project called PCGen? Any Dungeons and Dragons fans out there? Don't be shy. Yeah, one person in the back, yes. So it's an open source project I'm involved with. We are proud to admit we have 750,000 lines of Java code alone. For some reason, we can't get new volunteers to come on board our project and help out, and we can't really understand why.
It's almost like it's a huge ball of mud.
Yeah, almost. So if anyone would like to come along and gain some practical experience in reducing a large code base, then please contact me afterwards. We could do with your help.
Okay. So
Number 5.
Pokemon patterns. This is a follow-on to the to design-driven design. So hands up if you think you know what a Pokemon pattern is.
Anybody here have children?
Yep.
Yeah. And
Go in the front. Yep, you've got to have a system which contains every single pattern in it.
Yeah, that's right. Every single one of them. So mentioned this before. Use all of the gang for design patterns. The Spring framework is fantastic for this. Has anyone taken a look at the source code for the Spring framework? Yes. Default abstract factory bean singleton. This is why Rod Johnson built a $200 million company and sold it. It's fantastic. He's recently joined TypeSafe, the Scala folk. Be very, very afraid for Akka and Scala if you're a fan. It's a bit unfair to Rod. He's a friend, so it's okay to needle him, I think. But yeah, again, use all the design patterns. If you can get really long class names with lots of abstract and factory in there, it shows that you're building a framework. And frameworks last. Frameworks keep you in a job.
Okay. Hands up if you've ever written a framework. Hands up if you've written more than 3 frameworks. And hands up if you haven't written a framework but you think it sounds like a cool thing to do. Yeah, that's pretty much everyone else. There we go.
Brilliant. All right.
So the appropriate design pattern is your friend. With all of these things, I think that one of the challenges we don't have in programming is that we can't code quickly enough. Instead, one of the challenges we do have is that people don't take enough time to think before they code, and learning what the patterns are, learning when is an appropriate time to use one, and not just randomly trying to spew out 1,500 lines of code in one day, is the way to go.
Yeah. There's another important thing that you should really keep an eye on, especially when you're choosing technology sets, and this is something that we've been learning recently. Ben and I have a small technology startup together called JClarity, so we've been doing a lot of this recently. Is that design patterns over time tend to turn into frameworks. They tend to turn into libraries. And then after a little bit of time yet again, they actually turn into being part of the core language itself.
Yeah.
keeping an eye on that transition is actually really, really important for you as technologists, because instead of using the design pattern and having to write that yourself, you should be able to transition to a framework. If people remember do people remember the struts framework, for example? Right? Who wrote their own kind of strutsy-like thing before struts arrived? Right? And you were stuck with it for ages because you just refused to move to struts at the time. So that's the kind of transition I'm talking about that you really need to keep an eye on.
Well, and not only that, but as new languages come out, you also get the development of the frameworks and certain ideas which were originally encapsulated in a pattern turning into a language feature. I mean, it's perfectly possible to write object-oriented code in C, but what you end up doing is constructing V-tables and crazy things with function pointers, and then you have to write your code in a very specific style to take advantage of this pattern, which then later, of course, in C++ is completely built into the language. So another example would be, Java's concurrency, which is it's great. It's showing its age somewhat. It's now 15 years old, and we've learned a lot about how to do concurrency and concurrent programming since then. And so new things like akka and closures agents, which represent a much more message passing style of concurrency. They're things you can use from Java, but they require a very specific code style and discipline to not use threads for everything, to let the platform try to manage your thread pools as much as you can. Whereas newer languages have those features built in by default. So over time, there's this kind of transition between a design pattern and a style of coding into a library or a framework, and then from there into a core language feature in some new language. And that's kind of an interesting trend to watch throughout the industry.
So what can you do? Who here carries whiteboard markers with them at all times? Yeah? Good on you, sir. That's fantastic. Anyone else? A few more of you, right?
Who carries them for any other reason other than to sniff them from time to time when they get bored in talks?
One person over there. All right. We got any security in the room? Just in case. I'm not kidding, people. Absolutely deadly serious here. Carry whiteboard markers with you at all times, especially at your day job, right? It is one of the most vital things you can do is to take 5 minutes out with your colleagues and sketch out an idea, right? Don't go to the keyboard. Don't go bashing out code. Actually write out first what it is the hell you're trying to do, okay? Really, really vital. It's amazingly, amazingly important. And if you want to ever call yourself a software architect or become an enterprise architect, it's this combination of being able to whiteboard and code, which is what's going to make you successful in your career, is doing that.
And it's also great to build the communication within the team. One of the ways you spot really effective teams is because developers in the teams don't have massively entrenched positions. Yes, they fight for their ideas. Yes, they can debate, but it never turns into that level of bad blood. There used to be a saying at Sun that you make a decision and then you commit and move on. And whenever the decisions were made, even the people who the decision went against went with that decision and accepted it and owned it. And it's not an easy thing to do. But if you can get to that, your teams become far more effective, and that leads you to a place where developers can express ideas and architectural constructs that they've come up with without having a lot of fear. So you can bring out one of your colleagues' ideas. You can trust that their idea is good, and then you can verify it in an atmosphere which isn't hostile. And that's a huge step forward to making your teams a lot more productive.
And again, from personal experience, so we're doing deep diving JVM performance tuning stuff for our startup, and we've the two guys working for us have both got PhDs in computer science and engineering. Ben here has got a master's degree in mathematics from Cambridge University. Our chief scientist used to work for Cray. I'm the stupid guy in the room, right? So you can imagine the sort of high-level arguments that these guys all have, and we will happily spend an entire day at a whiteboard to knock something out, and then spend the 35 minutes writing the code because we all agree with the idea and we're all absolutely behind it. We can move on. And it's a really valuable thing to do. And it's kind of counter to what a lot of managers would like to see you doing because they believe you should be at the keyboard typing away.
Yes. I mean, our job is to think. Our job is not to hit the keyboard. And it's rare that you'll find a manager who understands that and believes it. But when you do, they are worth their weight in gold.
Yep. Typing is the easy part. Next one, tuning by Folklore. Who here has had to do some performance tuning? Yeah?
Yeah.
Who was actually successful at it? Well, a few of you. That's good to hear. That's good to hear.
So, how do you performance tune? What's the secret magic switch? Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I personally like black candles. I sacrifice some chickens. Hope there's no vegetarians in the room. Apologies if you are. But this is the truth in our industry today, right? Most people are just out there guessing.
Yeah.
Okay. My application's slow. So what do I do, Ben?
Oh, I get out the profiler. That's right, isn't it?
It's got to be somewhere in the code, right?
Yep, absolutely. Okay, who does that? Hands up, you know, if the first thing you do is reach for a profiler when your code is slow.
Yeah, no, don't be shy to admit it.
No, everyone.
I did this when I first started as well.
Sure. Wrong. Sorry, just flat out wrong. Because you don't know that the problem's in the code. It's not code that's slow. It's systems that are slow. And until you've proved that the problem actually is in the code, picking up the profiler is just the wrong thing to do. Because it will always give you an answer. That's what tools do. They give you answers. But they don't tell you that the answer they've given you is in any way relevant to the question you asked. Okay? You will always see a piece of code which comes top of the profiler, which looks to be the bottleneck. Okay? But what happens if that's I/O? What happens if what's really keeping the code slow is the fact you've got a slow disk controller on an NFS server over there somewhere?
We've had classic examples where we've had users whose mouse drivers were slow on their client machine. That was the real performance problem. A network card that was set at half duplex instead of full duplex. Okay? If you're not looking at your time budgets, and if you're not actually measuring what your hardware is doing, then you're not actually measuring, you're just guessing. So empirical evidence trumps intuition, trumps experience, okay, and it trumps guesswork.
Yeah. Developers always think that the problem's code, because that's what our stock in trade is. You know? We go down a path of trying to think about, you know, the golden path for our algorithm and our code paths. But when thinking about performance, you actually need to think much more broadly. You need to think about what else is going on in the system and what could be causing, you know, degradation and what all the actors and all of the moving parts are. And that's often a very different sort of mindset to the one that developers have by default. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, people who are testers, people who are operations people are sometimes better at doing this stuff by default. But it's a skill that every developer can learn.
And because you're in an evil talk run by me, there is a shameless plug. So what can you do? Come join our little community. We talk about this stuff all the time. We share horror stories with each other. And yeah, it's darn good fun. We name, but we don't shame.
So we had one of these earlier, didn't we?
We certainly did. The Deity class, otherwise known as the God class or the Buddha Vista class or whatever you want to call it. Who here has a class in their source code that is over 1,000 lines long? Can we go 5,000? Can we go 10,000? 15? Okay. 1 on 15? 20? Yes, 30. Oh goodness me, that's superb. Give that guy a round of applause.
Yeah. You, sir, win a beer.
Come collect it from us afterwards. So, for me personally, I like God classes. PCGen, the open source project I was talking about before, we had one that was 58,000 lines of code long. Some idiot's gone and cut that down to about 32, which I'm really unhappy about. And the reason why? Because if you have all of your code in one file, it is easy to find.
Yeah.
Right? Who here has tried to navigate through their IDE to try and find where the hell their code path is going? I frickin' hate Eclipse and IntelliJ and NetBeans because I can't actually follow where my code's going anymore. Heaven forbid if you're using something like Spring and you have to duck out to XML. You've got no idea what's going on anymore. So?
grep, right?
Grep.
Yeah.
Grep and vi. You only need to use vi and you just use grep. And I tell you what, I can still hack far faster than these young kids in their IDEs. Terrible.
So, who here has heard of the solid principles? Oh, only a few people. Okay.
That's interesting. Okay.
So, basically, this is an acronym which stands for 5 different principles which all developers should be aware of when doing design activities. So, S stands for SRP, the single responsibility principle. Yeah. Hands up if you know what the single responsibility principle is. A few people. Okay,
that's good. So people have heard of individual parts of solid, so that's good.
O is for open/closed. Which is basically that components should be open for extension, but closed in terms of encapsulation. L is the one that people always forget. Hands up if you remember what the L stands for. The Liskov substitution principle. Absolutely.
Yes.
Hands up if you know what that is. Only a few people.
A
Okay.
few people, exactly.
I promise you, you all know what this principle is. It sounds like something off Doctor Who, but actually it's not. What it really is it's the idea that if I have a class, then I can have an instance of a subclass in place of the instance of the superclass. It just means that inheritance works. That's essentially all that it means. Okay. But it's got this nice fancy name.
I is for interfaces, and I hope we all code to interfaces, don't we? Not seeing a lot of nodding out there. That's not good. And the D?
Dependency injection.
Dependency injection. So who here uses dependency injection? Who here understands dependency injection? Or is it just the magic that Spring does for you?
Hands up if it's magic that Spring does for you.
Yeah?
Yeah, there we go. We've got some honesty in the room today. That's great.
Yeah, that is good. Dependency injection is an incredibly powerful technique, especially if you are trying to test or test drive your code. All right? So if you haven't looked into this design principle, then I strongly suggest you do, because it will actually allow you to test your components a lot easier. In these kind of awkward situations where you go, oh, I can't test my database code because it means I'd have to have my database up all the time. Things like dependency injection will help you with that. It helps you mock out components and things. Yep. So do go take a look at it.
Who practices mocking as part of their test infrastructure? Oh, that's good
awesome.
to see.
That is awesome. Much better than last year.
Yep.
Fantastic. So what can you do?
Well, if you read the code, after a few beers at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you still understand it, that's a good thing.
Yeah, you're doing well.
This is only half a joke. Seriously, because most programming is maintenance programming. Hands up if you've ever been on call and you've actually had to deal with a situation where you had to deal with an outage at 3 in the morning after you've been drinking and struggled to understand what the code was telling you. Yeah, that's both.
New Year's Eve 1999. Best payday of my life, by the way. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So you can always get somebody outside of your team. This is kind of a hard thing to mock up, and you certainly don't want to be drinking while on call as a rule, just to try to get to this situation. But you could, for example, just ask somebody else in a different bit of your organization, but outside of your immediate team, to just walk through the code with you. It takes 20 minutes even for a relatively large system. And if they can follow it and they can understand the basic principles, that's good. Yeah.
The only other piece of advice I'll give is naming. Naming is absolutely vital, right? You shouldn't actually have to even really document your code base in a lot of cases, because you should just be able to read from your method names, your variable names, your class names, your package names, what the heck it is your code base does, okay? We actually run what we call a noun scanner over our code bases, and if we get back from our class names and things just names like list, array list, hash map, collection, we know we've done something wrong. We're not actually modeling our domain correctly, okay? What we want to have coming out of our particular system is things like performance counters, correlations, things that matter to us in our domain as performance tuning specialists, yeah?
So,
number 8.
Lean Startup Ninja. Have you got any Lean Startup Ninjas in the room?
Or are we all pirates in here?
Yeah, pirate monkeys. Okay.
Are we pirates? Pirates? Robots? Ninjas? Okay. The Lean Startup Ninja, and I don't know if you've seen the YouTube video. Are you iterating enough? Are you iterating enough? If you're not iterating, you're not a Lean Startup Ninja. Recommend you go check it out. But this is what us Lean Startup Ninjas do, okay? If your code compiles, get it out the door, okay? Let your users be your testers, okay? Feedback is important. Early feedback is important, and your users will love the honesty of the interaction they have with you.
Yep. This is a modern form of the absolute classic anti-pattern known as throw it over the wall.
Yeah. In all seriousness, there is a little bit of truth to compiles equals ship it. It is actually a principle we follow in our startup, and a lot of other smart, small, fast-moving organizations do actually do this. Some large organizations such as Facebook do this as well. They deploy, 20, 30 times a day, I think?
Yep. That's why Facebook's always broken. Seriously, in all seriousness, continuous delivery. Hands up if you practice continuous delivery. Yeah. Oh, actually, that's pretty cool.
That's really good. Wow.
What about continuous integration? Hopefully, there should be a few more
Jenkins,
people.
Hudson, Team City, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So that's interesting, because when we actually put the product names in there, a few more hands went up. So it's interesting that people knew the product names, but not necessarily the general term.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Basically, for continuous delivery, you need to make sure that you've got stakeholders that are properly engaged. If you have a large organization like a bank and you have traders, if anyone's ever had to deal with traders, this may not be the best fit outside of teams which really get it. So you need to spend time working with your management, working with your stakeholders to get people bought into this. It can be a huge business enabler, but you need to be aware and conscious of the costs that it's going to represent and the things that you'll need to do in terms of organizational change to get this implemented. You can't just try to do this and expect to succeed without understanding the dynamics of the organization and how it's actually going to fit with the people that you actually work with.
And the key thing here to sell it to your management, to sell it to the business, is that it is actually a business enabler, okay? I spent 2 years at a very large investment bank doing this exactly for their risk trading teams. And by the end of it, the business could come in the morning and say, we need to make this change in the system to react to the Apple IPO or to the Google IPO or something similar, some massive large-scale event. And we need it in production in like 4 hours. Can you even physically do this? And after the 2 years of getting this continuous delivery pipeline in place, the answer was yes, okay? And that was incredibly powerful for the business, and therefore they actually threw a ton of budget at it to get the stuff done, right? And IT and business became closer together, and it was, a nice sort of joint organization actually trying to deliver business value. So it does change your entire organization.
Okay, so what can you do in the meantime? Okay, well, you can get your continuous integration story straight. Because one of the building blocks that you need to get continuous delivery out there is you need to have a solid pipeline to build off. If you don't have your continuous integration pipeline working properly, you can't really do continuous delivery because there's nowhere to start from. So make sure that your Ant, your Gradle, your Maven, is hooked into Jenkins or Hudson or TeamCity or whatever continuous integration product that your company uses. Make sure that you have test cases. I know I shouldn't need to say that, but I really still do. Hands up if you do test coverage and have an automated coverage tool. Okay, that's good. That's
really good.
About half the room. That's a decent score. So if you don't have a coverage tool, you should think about getting one. There are some open source options. There are some payware versions.
There's a whole bunch. And to get started, we know it can be difficult to get these things installed on test servers and infrastructure inside your large organizations. Put it on your own machine, put it on your own laptop, start showing people, okay? Once other people start seeing the new shiny, okay, you'll be amazed how quickly it'll spread through your organization, okay? If you can't get approval from above, do it subversively from below. It's easier to apologize than to ask for permission.
So,
number 9.
CV++.
CV++. Who here is a contractor or an independent consultant? Oh, not too many of you, all permanent. Okay, interesting. Well, CV++, it really is a contractor's dream. And the idea is that you just need to add more and more technologies to your CV. And how you get those technologies is by finding jobs where you can learn on the job. So you lie in your interview. Scala, of course I know Scala. I read the book yesterday. It's absolutely fine. Because chances are it's someone from the HR department interviewing you anyway, so they're not going to know any better, right? Then you use that job to actually learn Scala on the go, add it to your CV, and your salary goes up by another $1,000 a year. Fantastic. Another great indicator for this is the Tiobe index. Do people know what the Tiobe index is? Kind of indicates popularity of programming languages by Google searches, right? It's actually statistically frickin' terrible.
Yep.
But it does give you a little bit of an indication of where the next wave is going and the next thing you should be adding to your CV. Okay?
In all seriousness, there are actually analysts out there that are doing a decent job of tracking trends in the industry. So hands up if you've heard of an analyst firm called RedMonk.
No.
Wow, okay.
If you haven't, go check them out.
Yeah,
quite seriously.
Yeah, probably the one thing to take away, if you don't take away anything else, is to go and look at RedMonk and the analysis they're doing. We know that a couple of their main analysts personally. They do actual proper maths and stuff. And the data science and data analytics is, we think, one of the best out there.
Yeah,
yeah sure. RED MONK.
So I guess what we're really trying to say is just be good at software development principles. So we talked before about the solid principles. They can apply to any language that is, effectively an object-oriented language, right? So whether you're a C# developer, a Java developer, dare I say it, even a Ruby or JavaScript developer. Just be good at the underlying principles. The languages, the frameworks, whether you're using Hibernate or JPA, or whether you're using Spring or Juice for your dependency injection, it doesn't actually matter. Learn what dependency injection is. Learn how JPA works under the hood. So in other words, learn how an object relational mapping technology works. Don't learn how Hibernate works. Okay? You can pick that up in a day after you understand the principles. Okay? Principles will trump technologies every single time. Yeah? So, as another theme on top of that, I'll let you cover this one.
Sure. Right. So software development is more about more than just programming. It's about more than bashing the keyboard. It's about thinking about what you're doing. It's about communicating. It's about understanding the business problem, understanding the environment. There are so many developers out there who don't think it's their job to understand the business domain. Just give me requirements. I don't need to know anything else but that. How many times have people heard that? Hands up if you ever heard someone say that. Yeah? Hands up if you think it's true. Oh, two brave people down the front. It's not true. Our job is to get embedded with business, to understand the other stakeholders, and to make sure we deliver what they want. And also, the constraints of a particular language like Java. Java is not a particularly complicated programming language. Has anyone ever, phoned up a recruiter or had a recruiter tell them that they couldn't go forward for a job because this role requires 10 years Java experience and you only have 5? Anybody had that? I had that years ago.
Yeah.
It's crazy, Does anybody think that in between the 5-year and the 10-year mark with programming with Java, you're actually going to learn much more about the language? Come on. I mean, this is one of the simplest programming languages one could think of. If you haven't learned everything there is to know about it inside the first 3 or 4 years, you should worry about that.
So in short, if someone asks you to code up a square wheel, ask them why the wheel is square. Don't just give them a square wheel, because it doesn't frickin' work. And
also, don't assume that necessarily that business stakeholders necessarily have a better idea than you do about features. Always talk with them. So many developers just blindly assume that because the business people are the domain experts, that they can just, they should just take as gospel everything that's said by the business. The other thing to note is that because we deal with computers, and our minds are trained to think in the way that computers actually work, we think about things which have quite rigid process sometimes. So whereas business processes quite often have trapdoors and special cases and shortcuts and things which are a little bit squishy and fuzzier than the models that we actually end up building. So our models can end up being too brittle and too inflexible to actually handle the business process, and we then have to go back in again and add in all these exceptions and special cases, and that leads to this big mess.
And a lot of if statements and switch statements.
And so understanding up front exactly how the business process works, including how fuzzy it is versus how crisp, can save you a huge amount of time later on.
Okay. We're going to go a little bit more rapid fire now, because now we're entering into the age of fun new technologies. The first one is this. I has the cloud.
Who has the cloud? Who has the cloud?
Yes, we have some people who has cloud. Fantastic. This is what I think of cloud. I are a pretty cloud. If you are not part of the cloud, if you're not involved in the cloud, you might as well give up your technology choice now. You are dead in the water, you're a dinosaur. Give up, go run a bar on a beach somewhere. Because if you're not part of the cloud, then, well, you're just not one of the cool kids anymore, and tough luck, pretty much.
Alternatively, how many people, by the way, have actually heard that speech about, we have to be in the cloud, from people that have no idea what the cloud is?
Did anyone go to the Oracle Open World, keynote sessions and stuff? Yeah, right.
So, evaluate.
No, I'm not coming back next year.
I don't think you are. There are a whole bunch of providers out there, and it's important to understand what your drivers are for doing the cloud. Yes, there's a huge amount of potential, and we are seeing real shifts in the industry. But at the same time, there's also an enormous amount of hype. Not every process can or should be moved to the cloud straight away. So just go slow and easy.
Yep. Who here wants their medical records out in the cloud, owned by Google, for example? Yeah? No?
Nobody. Absolutely nobody.
Funny that. What is it you can do? There is a fundamental shift happening, okay? The cloud is here, it's real, it is going to become a utility like electricity or like water in the next, probably we think between 3 and 5 years is our estimation. There's obviously a lot of interesting things going into it, and it is dead easy to try out and dead easy to work with today as a Java developer, okay? 2012 was the year of Java onto the cloud. There is a ton of providers which make life really easy for you to go in there just via a simple web console, fire up a cloud instance, fire up a Tomcat or a Jetty or a JBoss or a BA WebLogic, deploy some little toy app like a little war file, with Hello World in it maybe. Takes you all of 30 minutes to start understanding the paradigm. So again, when you go home after Java 1, take the hour out to just go to one of these providers and do it. If you're a little bit afraid, if you're a little bit worried, you don't know how to do this stuff, grab your colleague, grab your friends, sit down together and just nut this stuff out. Okay, a lot of people are really scared of all of this cloud stuff that's coming. Don't be. Just try one of these providers out. They're absolutely dead simple.
And they're very, very cheap. I mean, you can do this stuff for basically nothing at all.
Zero cost. So go do it. Next one. Haz Mobile. Fantastic. Who here is doing some sort of mobile development? Yeah, that's actually really high. Cool. Okay, so I hope you're all quitting your day jobs and that you're all going to make millions off the Apple Store, right? No? Any success stories here? Not really? You probably wouldn't be sitting in this room if you were. You'd be sitting in your island in Hawaii somewhere.
Yep.
Again, this is another thing that if you're not in the mobile game, if you're not in the cloud and mobile game, again, you're a dinosaur. You're going to be left behind. So mobile. Going back to coding in Objective-C is a wonderful experience because you have to think about your memory management again, your pointers and all sorts of fun stuff like that. Makes you a real programmer again, I think, personally. No? HTML5, absolutely for the win, right? It is a standard coming to you in about 2017.
It's what they call a living standard.
A living standard, fantastic.
Precisely how that's different from anything the browser vendors decide to make up, I'm not sure, but maybe somebody knows better than I do. So, sure, a lot of apps are going to require mobile, and there's going to be a chain of mobile all the way through to cloud and large data servers on the back end. But always think about what your user experience needs actually are. There's no point in building an app just for the sake of it. I think one of the things which I find the most frustrating at the moment is Facebook. You click on a link which someone's posted on Facebook, and it's to take you to a news site. And instead of taking you to the news site, it says, "Do you want to install our app?" No, I don't want to install your app. I want to go and look at the link which I clicked on, because what I want is the web. I don't want an app for everything. I don't want that fragmentation. So do think before adding to the ecosystem of horrible apps which no one's going to use. If it can be done with just a decent mobile website, do it like that.
Yeah. So really, if you are involved in mobile development, please step back and think to yourself, we're all mobile phone users here, right? We're all tablet users and we all have rants every day. I hope some of you go visit the Oatmeal, for example, or the daily WTF site, right? Think about what really pisses you off about the apps that you use today and don't repeat those mistakes. We've got a big opportunity here to learn from the first ecosystem that came out. Let's not repeat those mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, case in point, we live in London. We spend an awful lot of time on the tube. Why is there no decent offline Twitter client? Why in all this ecosystem of apps that exist is there not a Twitter client that can cope with being offline for reasonable periods of time?
Offline clients for all sorts of things, right?
Absolutely.
Crazy.
There's
a business idea for some of you out there. Make millions. Big data. Who here has been doing big data? It's all about big data, right? If you collect terabytes and terabytes and petabytes of data, you've won. You've got all the information about the customers, and it's game over. Just like Facebook. Oh wait, what's happened to the Facebook price again?
They're doing okay, aren't they?
They're doing okay, aren't they? Yeah. So Facebook has got all this data, for example.
Mark's doing okay.
Mark's doing just fine, yeah. There's no one who works for Facebook here, is there? Good, I made that mistake last time. One of the things I like to say about big data, NoSQL databases. Everyone's heard this meme, I hope. MongoDB is web scale.
No, that's the other thing which you should Google when you get home, but not in the office.
Not in the office. Again, if you're not in the big data game, if you're not in the NoSQL game, right? You are going to be left behind. So you need to get out of this relational database nonsense. You need to get out of this capability of querying your databases and getting real valuable data out. And you need to just have these giant hash maps in memory. And just chuck everything in there, and because you've collected everything, you've won. Yeah.
Think about the data you're actually storing. I mean, I can't believe I actually have to say this, but another true story. A bank, again, who shall remain nameless, decided that they were going to start using NoSQL instead of SQL for transactions. Yeah, that ended well. Hands up if you would like to see your bank statements and your financial transactions stored in MongoDB, say. Nobody.
Nobody, yep.
So it's important to think about the data you're actually storing. It's important to remember that for a very large degree of applications, we had relational databases for a great many years, and there's a good reason why they work and why they're thought about. But not only that, but the non-functionals really do matter. People think that there's something magical about the relational database, and there's not. It's just that in major organizations, you have dedicated infrastructure teams, you have dedicated DBAs who provide a high level of support because those data stores are seen as being critical to the organization. And it doesn't actually matter whether those stores are relational or non-relational. You have to have the organizational buy-in and the commitment to provide the resourcing to actually have DBAs. And that costs a lot of money. So when you have all of this investment in relational databases, it can be hard for the quality of service for non-relational to meet that same level. So it's got nothing to do with the technology. It's got an awful lot to do with the investment and the non-functionals.
Yeah. Think about things like, how on earth do I back up 10 petabytes of data because I've got this all stored in my NoSQL databases out there in the cloud, right? It's these kind of things and the replication of that data and how do I get reports out of that data, okay? Stuff that people and businesses have been used to for 20 years is all of a sudden kind of being thrown away by this NoSQL wave, right? The tooling is starting to get there, but I would strongly suggest that you do not blindly jump into it, okay? However, again, just like with the cloud stuff and the mobile stuff, you can try these things at home, right? You can install MongoDB, Cassandra, Nodes, Neo4j, which is a graph database, whole bunch of things. You can just try them out at home. There's Spring's got bindings for it. Java EE's got bindings for this stuff now. It's really easy to use and try out. Try it out with your colleagues. See what's coming around the corner, okay? Be prepared for what's happening because, NoSQL and big data is coming for a lot of you guys, especially in large organizations. So you will have to think about this stuff.
And that's kind of the final point. Whatever you do, take a deep breath and think. Think about what you hear. Evaluate critically. Don't just take it because somebody who's up on a stage or has written a book says so.
We like to have a saying that those who can't code teach. Those who can't teach write books. Those who take 2 years to finish their book become conference speakers. So you have to be very, very careful about who you're listening to. You've got to evaluate things for yourself. And in the context of the organization that you work in or the hobby project that you're working on, okay, it's more important to think up front and design up front and try prototyping out front than it is to take a 60-page document and hack out code. So thank you very much for listening. We hope you guys enjoyed it. And feel free to come up and speak to us afterwards.